Becky nearly gave up on saving her animal shelter until a quiet stranger showed up. Michael didn't say much, but the animals trusted him instantly. While greedy developers circled like vultures, one moment changed everything. A project that once seemed hopeless might have one last chance, if they dare to believe it. Becky Wells wiped her forehead with her sleeve and exhaled, the scent of damp fur and cleaning solution lingering in the air. The Sweetwater Pet Shelter had been her life for the past 5 years, but lately it felt like she was trying to hold back the tide with a bucket. Bills stacked up on her desk like an ever-growing mountain. Adoption rates were plummeting. Volunteers were burning out. And to make matters worse, a real estate developer had been circling like a vulture, eager to buy out the land and turn it into luxury apartments. The volunteers' welcome sign out front had been there for years, its once bright lettering now faded from the sun. It was more of a hopeful gesture than anything else. Becky had stopped expecting much from it a long time ago. Most people just wanted to feel good about themselves for an afternoon before they disappeared, never to return. Becky had learned to spot the ones who weren't going to stick around. The front door jingled, and Becky walked to the reception area, expecting to see the familiar face of Mrs. Chang, an elderly lady who came by to fill her days with something useful. She was one of the few that stuck. But instead, a stranger stepped inside. Michael was tall, his frame lean but strong. His sun-weathered skin and the hint of stubble along his jawline suggested a man accustomed to the road. He carried a backpack slung over one shoulder, and his piercing green eyes scanned the room with quiet curiosity. Taking in the tired room, the scent of dog fur, and the sound of distant meal. "Looking to adopt?" she asked, already half preparing her polite dismissal. He shook his head. "Actually, I was hoping I could help." "Ever worked with animals?" she asked, crossing her arms. Michael gave a small shrug. "Not officially. But I know my way around a tool set, and I've got plenty of time." She was skeptical. "And what exactly are you hoping to get out of this?" This was where she got the real answers. The ones who weren't serious would stumble, mumble something vague about how they just wanted to help before making a quick exit. Michael didn't falter. He held her gaze, steady and unwavering. "A sense of purpose," he said simply. "And something useful to do with my time. Maybe a bed, if you have one. But I'll earn my keep." It wasn't the answer she was expecting. But people could talk all they wanted. It was action that mattered. She grabbed a mop from the supply closet and handed it to him. "Start with the floors," she said, expecting that to be the end of it. Michael had always been good with his hands. He had spent years working construction, building things that would outlast him. He liked the work. Liked the sense of completion, of standing back at the end of a long day and seeing something real. Something solid that hadn't existed before. But life had a way of pulling the rug out from under you. The company he had worked for was bought out by a corporation that saw more value in tearing things down than building them up. For the first time in years, Michael had no place to be. So he packed a bag, took his last paycheck and all the savings he had, and hit the road. He'd sit on a bus for a while, watching the countryside trundle slowly by, pick up small repair jobs where he could. Along the way, he met dogs. Strays, mostly. He pet the ones who let him, and fed the ones who didn't. Sometimes he'd see the same dog more than once, lingering near gas stations or sleeping in the shade of old buildings, and he'd sit with them for a while before moving on. But he never took one with him. It wasn't fair not, when he didn't know where he'd be tomorrow or next week. Passing through Sweetwater, the small worn-down pet shelter caught his eye. Maybe this was a way to give back, even if he couldn't keep a dog of his own. Maybe he could stop moving, just for a little while. Michael didn't just do the job, he did it well. And when he was finished, he didn't leave. Instead, he found another task that needed doing. Then another. He fixed broken fences, put new roofs on the kennels, and even built a door for the back storage room. It didn't take long for Becky to notice the way the animals responded to him, either. The dogs seemed drawn to him. Even the nervous ones that flinched at sudden movements warmed to him quickly. He moved among them as if he were one of them, for the first time in a long while. Becky found herself watching someone new at the shelter and thinking, maybe this one's different. 2 nights ago, she had stayed late. sorting through stacks of paperwork at the front desk, when she heard something from the back lot, where the volunteers slept, the low murmur of a voice. Curious, she crept outside and saw Michael crouched near the newest arrival, a nervous mutt with scars along his muzzle. The dog had been shaking, tail tucked tight against his body, unwilling to move. Becky had tried everything: treats, soft words, even leaving him be, but nothing had reached him. But Michael hadn't tried to coax the dog. He had just sat down, a good few feet away, hands resting on his knees. Becky stood frozen for 20 minutes, watching as slowly, inch by inch, the dog crept toward him. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't magic. It was patience. And maybe that was why she had started to believe that Michael was different. Mrs. Chang wasn't so sure. She watched as Michael dug in fence posts for a bigger enclosure. One of the younger dogs, a scrappy terrier mix, darted towards Michael's hole. He laughed, scratching behind the pup's ears and standing back as dirt flew behind it. Mrs. Chang's gaze softened. "Well," she muttered, taking a sip from her thermos. "At least he knows how to use a hammer." Becky smiled to herself. That was about as close to approval as Mrs. Chang was willing to give. For now. Later that day, the front doors of the shelter creaked open, and Michael, perched on a ladder in the foyer, barely looked up from the desk he was fixing. "If you're looking to adopt, someone will be here soon," he said, driving in another screw. A voice, smooth and rehearsed, cut through the air. "Actually, I'm looking for Becky Wells." Michael paused. He recognized arrogance when he heard it. The guy was in his late 40s, well-dressed in an expensive-looking navy suit, his salt and pepper hair styled with precision. He wasn't dressed for a shelter, and the smirk on his face told Michael he knew it. Michael stood, wiping his hands on his jeans. "She's not here right now," he said, eyeing the man. "What do you need?" The developer extended his hand. "Blake Caldwell. I'm with Barclays Development." Michael didn't take the handshake. Blake continued, unbothered. "I'm sure you're just a volunteer, but I was hoping to speak with Becky about an offer I made her. A very generous offer." Michael crossed his arms. "What kind of offer?" "The kind that would take her off this sinking ship before it drags her under." Michael's jaw tightened. "Not sure I follow." Blake sighed, as if helping a particularly slow student. "Look around," he said, gesturing to the shelter's scuffed floors and second-hand furniture. "This place is bleeding money. I've been in real estate long enough to recognize a failing business when I see one." Michael felt his fingers twitch at his sides. "And your solution is what? Tearing it down?" Blake looked amused. "That's one way to put it. But really, I'm offering Becky a lifeline. Believe me, it's more than I'd offer. This place is a dump. But the higher-ups..." Michael had dealt with men like him before. The ones who made their fortunes building things that didn't matter and destroying things that did. He should have walked away. But Blake's smugness made Michael's blood boil. He took a slow step forward. "You can take your offer, and, Michael..." Becky's voice cut through the tension as she strode in from the back, her expression already tight with frustration. She shot him a look, a silent stand-down, before plastering on a neutral expression and facing Blake. "What do you want?" "I was just stopping by," he said smoothly. "Wanted to see if you'd reconsider our last conversation." "I haven't," Blake exhaled, as if deeply disappointed, and headed for the door. "All right, I tried. But don't say I didn't warn you when you're out of options." Becky shook her head, walking toward the front desk and sinking into the chair behind it. "He's right, isn't he?" Michael said finally. Becky lifted her gaze, startled. "Excuse me?" Michael gestured around them. "The shelter. The money. It's bad, isn't it?" She hesitated, then leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling like she could find the answers up there. "It's bad," she admitted. "The bills are piling up. Donations are down. We're barely getting enough adoptions to cover expenses. And that's before Blake started breathing down my neck with his offers." Michael folded his arms, processing. He had assumed Becky ran the place because she loved it, but this was a fight. She wasn't going to quit. And neither was he. The next morning, as Becky poured fresh coffee into a chipped ceramic mug, Paul Mason stepped inside, his daughter Emily trailing behind him. Paul was dressed casually in a sweater and jeans, but his lawyerly professionalism was impossible to miss. He had been a friend of the shelter for years, and Becky knew him to be a decent man, even if he lived in a world far removed from hers. Emily, on the other hand, was a ball of untamed energy. She was 14 years old, with bright eyes and restless hands, already peering curiously around the shelter. "Becky," Paul greeted with a warm smile. "Long time no see." She returned the smile, setting the coffee down. "Paul, what brings you by?" "Emily's been asking to come here all week," Paul admitted with an amused glance at his daughter. "She's obsessed with animals, and after all the stories I've told her about this place, I figured it was time she saw it for herself." Emily beamed. "I want to see all the animals," Becky chuckled. "Well, we've got plenty of those." Just then, Michael emerged from the back, wiping his hands on a rag. Paul took one look at him and arched an eyebrow. "Don't believe we've met." Becky glanced between them. "Michael, this is Paul Mason, lawyer dad, occasional shelter donor. Paul, this is Michael. He's been helping out around here." Emily stared at him like a strange new species. "Are you the dog guy?" Michael frowned. "The what?" "My dad says every shelter has one. Someone who knows all the dogs' names, gives them treats, and secretly has a favorite." Michael smirked, crossing his arms. "You just made that up." Emily grinned. "I knew you were the dog guy." Becky laughed. "Emily, maybe Michael can show you around while I catch up with your dad." Emily brightened. "Yes." Michael led Emily through the shelter, showing her the new kennel area and the cat room. She had her phone out, recording as she went. First, a sleepy tabby cat stretching in a sunbeam. Then a trio of puppies tumbling over each other, and finally a large golden mutt, who immediately flopped onto his back for belly rubs when Michael walked by. "This is Max," Michael said, scratching behind the dog's ears. Emily, still recording, giggled. "He looks like a teddy bear." Michael glanced up at her phone. "You film everything?" "Duh," Emily said. "You never know what'll go viral." Michael scoffed. "Yeah, because people are so interested in a sheltered dog." But Emily had a knack for capturing moments. She zoomed in on Max's wagging tail. The way he practically melted under Michael's touch, the look of pure contentment on his face. Then, Michael did something she hadn't expected. He glanced at the camera and said, "This guy's been waiting for a home for months. Best dog in the world. Someone out there is missing out." Emily grinned. "That's perfect." That night, Emily sat cross-legged on her bed, her phone in her lap. The glow from the screen lit up her eager face as she scrolled through the clips she had taken earlier that day. She didn't just have Max's goofy belly rubs. She had the stretching tabby cat, lazily blinking into the sunlight. The clumsy puppies, tumbling over each other in a ridiculous ball of fur. A senior dog, curled up in a cozy bed, snoring softly. A couple of goats butting heads. A solemn horse, grazing the field behind the shelter. Emily grinned. She began putting the clips together. The animals, the shelter, the small real moments, she had captured it, all told a story. At the very end, she added Michael's glance to the camera. His words rolling over the last clip of Max's big, pleading eyes. She slapped on a fun, upbeat song, tagged Sweetwater, and added a caption, "Someone adopt this giant teddy bear. Sweetwater Pet Shelter needs you." And then, with one tap, she posted it. Becky wasn't a morning person. She had barely gotten through half a cup of coffee when she noticed her phone buzzing non-stop on the counter. She frowned, rubbing her bleary eyes before picking it up. Notifications flooded her screen. 10,000 shares, 50,000 likes, 200,000 views. And counting. Her stomach dropped. She had spent years trying to get people to notice the shelter, to get them to care. Now, in just one night, they'd exploded. The moment Becky stepped into the foyer, she froze. Cars clogged the small gravel parking lot, and a small group of families, young couples, and excited kids stood outside the entrance, peering in through the windows like the shelter had turned into some kind of exclusive club overnight. What the hell? The front door swung open, and a woman in a bright red sweater rushed in. "Hi," she chirped, way too awake for how early it was. "I saw the video last night. Do you still have the golden retriever? The teddy bear one?" "Max." Becky blinked. Yeah, he's still. I want to meet him," right?" Becky managed, still trying to comprehend what was happening. Another couple walked in right behind them. "Do you guys have kittens?" Becky spun in a circle, taking in the sudden flood of people. Michael strolled in from the back, hair messy, still smelling like the sawdust he'd been working with that morning. He came to an abrupt halt when he saw the crowd. Becky just stared at him. "Michael, yeah." She held up her phone, the notifications still rolling in. His brow furrowed. "What am I looking at? You're viral." Michael's expression remained blank for a moment, before understanding slowly dawned on him. "Wait, no, Becky smirked. "Oh yeah, Emily." Michael dragged a hand down his face. Becky laughed. "Yep." Michael pointed at the small mob of people crowding into the lobby. "So this, all of this, is because of the kid with the phone." Becky grinned. "Sure is, dog guy." The chaos of the morning had tripled by midday. The donation box overflowed. A local supermarket donated a mountain of pet food, and most importantly, the adoption board was filling up. Becky watched in awe as dog after dog, cat after cat, found new homes. 2 weeks after the viral video changed everything. Becky sat on the porch of Sweetwater Pet Shelter, watching as the last of the autumn leaves tumbled lazily to the ground. The shelter had never been busier. Donations had poured in, volunteers showed up daily, and adoption rates were at an all-time high. The buzz around Sweetwater wasn't dying down. In fact, it was growing. A shelter from 2 towns over, a small, struggling place, much like Sweetwater, had reached out. A recent storm had put their building into serious disrepair, and they were about to go under. "Do you think you could take our animals?" the shelter's owner asked. "What if we joined forces?" Becky had no idea how they'd fit everyone, but then another surprise came knocking. "We have 5 acres behind our property," an older couple explained, "and we'd rather see it used for something good than sell to developers." Becky couldn't believe it. A full expansion, a sanctuary. Michael, who had been listening, quietly spoke up. "I think I can help with that," he said simply. Things started falling into place. It turned out Michael wasn't the only one whose job had disappeared when the construction company shut down. He still had friends, good ones, so he made some calls. Guys who had been skilled builders, electricians, and landscapers, before suddenly finding themselves out of work when the industry dried up. Within days, the shelter was swarming with workers. Fences went up. Outdoor play areas took shape. The original shelter got a full renovation, turning cramped spaces into bright, open rooms for animals to stretch and play. Michael worked harder than any of them. He didn't just supervise. He dug trenches, hauled lumber, fixed plumbing, welded. Becky watched him from the porch one afternoon, her arms crossed, admiring the work in progress. Paul Mason sat at her side. "You didn't tell me you were building an empire," he joked, sipping from a travel mug. Becky smirked. "Didn't know we were until a few days ago." Paul, ever the planner, pulled out a notebook. "All right, well," he said, flipping through the pages. "Since this is happening, let's talk expansion permits." Becky exhaled, rubbing her temple. "I knew you were going to say that." By the time winter rolled around, the newly expanded shelter stood proudly against the landscape, a far cry from the crumbling building it had once been. Blake Caldwell had stopped calling weeks ago. Whether it was the overwhelming public support, the newly secured land, or the fact that Sweetwater had become too big to ignore, Becky didn't know. Sweetwater wasn't for sale, not now, not ever. Because Sweetwater wasn't just a shelter anymore. It was proof that second chances matter for animals, for people, for anyone willing to fight for something good. Kindness, patience, and dedication had turned a struggling shelter into something greater than anyone imagined. Not every story ends with a perfect resolution. But sometimes, with enough heart, the right people, and a little luck, the future is brighter than you ever thought possible.